Hello, and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Tonight's story takes us into the darkest hours of the Pacific War, where survival depended not on what a pilot could see, but on what he could sense through instruments glowing faintly in the black. At 23:40 on December 29th, 1944, Major Carroll C. Smith crouched inside the cramped cockpit of his P-61 Black Widow at Moore Field on the island of Mindoro, his eyes fixed on the instruments as his radar operator tracked a contact moving at 180 knots through the pitch-black skies north of the Philippine Islands. Smith was only 26 years old. He had already flown 43 combat missions and claimed 4 confirmed aerial victories. Tonight promised to be worse than anything before. Japanese planners had dispatched 12 bombers with one clear objective: to destroy the American airfields under construction below. Smith recognized the pattern immediately. For the past 2 weeks, Japanese bombers had attacked Mindoro every single night without exception. 334 air raid alerts in just 14 days. American engineers were racing against time, carving 2 new airfields out of the jungle to support the upcoming invasion of Lingayen Gulf. The Japanese fully understood what those airfields represented. If American fighters could operate from Mindoro, they would be able to provide air cover for the entire invasion force. Construction had to be stopped at any cost, so the bombers came every night. Conventional bombers, kamikaze aircraft, anything capable of carrying explosives. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron had arrived at Mindoro only 3 days earlier, on December 26. Smith's squadron was now the only thing standing between those incoming bombers and nearly 20,000 American troops sleeping in canvas tents below. The pressure was overwhelming. Every bomber that slipped through meant dead engineers, shattered construction crews, damaged runways, delayed airfields, and a postponed invasion. Every delay at Lingayen Gulf meant more American casualties. Smith's P-61 was unlike anything the Japanese had ever faced. The Northrop Black Widow was the first American aircraft designed specifically for night combat. It stretched across a 66-foot wingspan and was powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines, each producing 2,000 horsepower. Its top speed approached 366 miles per hour, yet its most lethal weapon wasn't the 4 20mm cannons mounted in its belly. It was the SCR-720 radar housed in the aircraft's nose. That radar could detect enemy aircraft up to 5 miles away in complete darkness. The Japanese had no idea such technology even existed. Their bombers flew at night because they believed darkness made them invisible. That belief was about to cost them dearly. Behind Smith, in a separate compartment, sat his radar operator, staring at a glowing screen that revealed every aircraft within range. Lieutenant Philip Porter had been tracking airborne targets for 6 months. He knew how to interpret the scope, how to vector Smith precisely toward contacts, and how to distinguish friendly aircraft from enemy bombers in the chaos of night operations. The problem facing them was brutally simple. 1 P-61, 12 Japanese bombers. If Smith committed to attacking a single target, 11 others would continue toward the airfields unchecked. The mathematics were unforgiving. Even if Smith managed to destroy 3 or 4 bombers, the rest would still reach their objectives. Casualties would rise. The airfields would suffer damage. The invasion timetable would slip. Smith had trained for this moment for 18 months. Night fighter training at Orlando Army Airfield in Florida had drilled him relentlessly in radar intercept procedures, night navigation, and gunnery practice conducted in total darkness. That training was so demanding because night fighting was the most dangerous form of aerial combat. There were no visual references, no horizon, nothing but instruments, radar returns, and the constant fear that the target ahead might be friendly. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron had flown its first combat missions back in November 1943, operating from primitive airstrips in New Guinea. At first, they flew P-70 Havocs, then modified P-38 Lightnings fitted with experimental radar sets. The P-61 Black Widows had finally arrived in September 1944, and they changed everything. The Black Widow was stable, forgiving, and powerful. Most importantly, its radar actually worked. But radar alone couldn't solve Smith's problem tonight. 12 bombers were inbound. His fuel would last maybe 3 hours. If he spent 10 minutes engaging each target, he could intercept only 3 bombers before having to return to base. That meant 9 bombers would get through. 9 bombers meant hundreds of casualties, possibly thousands if they struck fuel dumps or ammunition storage areas. If you want to see how Smith hunted down 4 Japanese bombers in total darkness, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Now back to Smith. At 23:42, Porter's voice crackled through the intercom. He had 4 separate contacts on the scope, all heading south toward Muro, all flying at different altitudes. Smith had to decide which bomber to pursue first, and whether his plan to intercept all 4 in a single night was brilliant or suicidal. Smith pushed the throttles forward. The twin R-2800 engines responded instantly, their power pressing him back into his seat as the Black Widow climbed at 2,000 feet per minute. Porter began calling out vectors. Heading 035. Altitude 8,000 feet. Range 4 miles. Smith saw nothing through canopy. Only blackness. No moon. No stars. Heavy cloud cover smothered the sky completely. This was exactly why the Japanese had chosen tonight. Complete darkness made their bombers invisible to conventional fighters. But Smith wasn't flying a conventional fighter. The SCR-720 radar used a rotating parabolic dish mounted in the nose of the aircraft. It transmitted microwave pulses in a 180-degree arc ahead of the plane. When those pulses struck an aircraft, they bounced back to the receiver. On the radar operator scope, each return appeared as a glowing blip. The system used 2 displays, one showing azimuth left or right of the aircraft's nose, and another showing elevation above or below it. Porter monitored both simultaneously, guiding Smith with calm, precise corrections. Left 5 degrees, down 3 degrees. The system worked because Porter was exceptionally good at his job. Range 3 miles. Smith activated his own radar scope, a smaller display integrated into the main instrument panel. Once the target closed and far enough, Smith could track it himself without relying entirely on Porter's voice. The pilot scope was simpler, showing only range and relative position, but it was enough to finish the job. The target was a Mitsubishi G4M bomber, known to the Americans as the Betty. It was powered by Mitsubishi engines producing roughly 2,000 horsepower, with maximum speed of about 270 miles per hour. It carried a crew of 7 and a bomb load of 1,760 pounds. The Betty had one fatal flaw. It lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. A single accurate burst from Smith's cannons could turn it into a fireball. Range 2 miles. Smith now saw the blip clearly on his scope. It was steady and unwavering. The bomber crew had no idea he was behind them. Japanese bombers carried no tail warning radar, no way to detect a pursuing night fighter. They flew through the darkness, convinced they were safe. The P-61 made that assumption deadly. Smith closed to 1,000 yards. He still couldn't see the Betty with his own eyes. The darkness was absolute. He relied entirely on the radar scope. The glowing blip swelled as the distance closed. 800 yards, 700, 600. At 500 yards, Smith finally saw it with his own eyes, a darker silhouette moving against slightly lighter clouds. The bomber's exhaust flames were barely visible, faint orange flickers spilling from the engine nacelles. Smith eased the P-61 into position, slightly below the bomber and just behind it. The 4 20mm Hispano M2 cannons were mounted in the lower fuselage, fixed forward. To aim them, Smith had to aim the entire aircraft. He brought the N6 gun sight into alignment, its illuminated reticle projected onto a combining glass in front of him. Carefully, he adjusted his position until the bomber sat perfectly centered in the glowing circle. Range 400 yards. Smith armed the cannons. Each gun carried 200 rounds, 800 rounds total, enough for roughly 40 seconds of sustained fire. He would not need anywhere near that. Night fighter doctrine demanded short, precise bursts. Get close. Fire. Confirm the kill. Move on. Every wasted round meant fewer chances against the remaining bombers. At 350 yards, Smith squeezed the trigger. All 4 cannons fired at once. The sound was thunderous, even to the roar of the engines. 20mm high-explosive shells streaked toward the Betty at 2,800 feet per second, the tracers carving red lines through the darkness. Smith fired for just 2 seconds, 12 rounds per cannon, 48 shells total. The Betty's right wing exploded. Fuel ignited instantly. The bomber rolled violently to the right and plunged into a steep dive. Smith watched as the burning aircraft fell, its flames briefly illuminating the clouds below. At 23:57, 8 miles north of Mindoro, it struck the water and vanished. 1 bomber destroyed. 11 remained. Smith glanced at his fuel gauge. He had already burned through 15% of his fuel, and 3 more contacts were still glowing on Porter's scope, all inbound, all separated by miles of empty black sky. Smith now had exactly 112 minutes of fuel left. At 0:14 on December 30th, Porter identified the second target, heading 180, altitude 6,000 feet, range 6 miles. Smith turned the P-61 south and began descending. The problem was geometry. The second bomber was 23 miles from the site of the first kill. At a cruising speed of 280 miles per hour, it would take roughly 5 minutes to intercept. 5 minutes during which the bomber continued flying closer to Mindoro, closer to the airfields, closer to completing its mission. Smith pushed the Black Widow faster, 320 miles per hour. The twin R-2800 engines drank fuel at an alarming rate at high power. Every minute at maximum speed cost him 3 minutes of patrol time. But if he didn't intercept quickly, the bomber would reach the target zone. American anti-aircraft guns would open fire. The bomber might be shot down, or it might release its bombs. Either outcome meant failure. The mathematics of night interception were merciless. Most night fighter missions ended without contact at all. The sky was vast, and even with radar, finding a single bomber demanded flawless coordination between pilot and radar operator. Finding 4 bombers in one night bordered on the impossible. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron had scored 18 kills since entering the Pacific Theater. 18 kills in 14 months. Smith already had 4 victories. Destroying 4 more in a single night would make him the top American night fighter ace of the war. But records meant nothing. What mattered was stopping the bombers. Porter fed him constant corrections. Smith adjusted his heading. The second contact grew brighter on the scope. For miles, 3 miles, 2 miles. At 1 mile, Smith spotted the bomber. Another Betty. Same outline. Same fatal vulnerability. This one was flying lower than the first, 6,000 feet instead of 8, closer to the cloud layer, leaving Smith less room to maneuver. He slid the P-61 beneath and behind the target. The approach had to be flawless. Too fast, and he would overshoot. Too slow, and the bomber might spot him. Night fighters depended on surprise. Once the enemy knew you were there, everything changed. Crews would begin evasive maneuvers. Gunners would open fire. A clean intercept could turn into a deadly dogfight. At 500 yards, Smith saw the Betty clearly, a dark shape cutting through a darker sky. The bomber flew straight and level. No evasive action. No sign the crew knew they were being hunted. The P-61's black paint rendered it nearly invisible at night, and its engines were quieter than most fighters. The Japanese called it the Black Widow. They feared it, but fear only mattered if they knew it was coming. Smith centered the target in his gun sight. Range 350 yards. He fired a 2-second burst. 48 rounds. The shells tore through the Betty's fuselage. The right engine ignited instantly, then the left. Within seconds, both wings were engulfed in flames. The bomber pitched forward and dove toward the ocean. Smith watched it fall. At 0:19, it slammed into the water and disappeared. 17 minutes past midnight. 2 bombers destroyed. 10 still airborne. Smith checked his gauges. 42% fuel remaining. Porter now had 2 more contacts on his scope. Both were closer to Mindoro than the previous targets. Both flew at different altitudes. One at 9,000 feet, the other at 4,000, and they were 8 miles apart. Smith made his decision. He would go after the higher target first. Climbing consumed less fuel than a rapid descent, but the higher bomber was farther north. Chasing it meant allowing the lower bomber to slip closer to the airfields. If Smith chose wrong, one bomb would get through, and the entire mission would be deemed a failure. Smith turned north and began climbing. The P-61 reached 9,000 feet at 0:23. Porter locked onto the third contact. Range 7 miles. Heading 160. Speed 190 knots. But this bomber was different. It was faster than the Bettys. It was maneuvering, turning, changing altitude. Someone aboard that aircraft knew American night fighters were operating in the area. The third bomber was a Nakajima Ki-49 Donryu. The Americans called it the Helen. It was faster than the Betty, with a maximum speed of around 306 miles per hour, and it carried heavier defensive armament. Its machine guns gave the tail gunner a clear field of fire directly behind the aircraft. A straight approach from dead astern would put Smith squarely in the gunner's sights. Smith adjusted his tactics immediately. Instead of sliding in directly behind the Helen, he approached from below and to the left, exploiting the bomber's blind spot. Most Japanese bombers had weak ventral coverage. Their bellies were exposed, and Smith intended to take advantage of that weakness. The range dropped to 1 mile. The Helen continued its evasive maneuvers, banking left, then right, climbing 200 feet, then descending 300. The pilot was skilled and experienced. He understood that straight and level flight made his aircraft an easy target. Random changes in heading and altitude complicated radar tracking and forced the interceptor to work harder for every yard gained. Porter compensated by reading the pattern of movement, predicting the bomber's next turn before it happened. Smith closed to 600 yards. The Helen's pilot snapped into a sharp right turn. Smith followed instantly. The P-61's twin-boom design gave it exceptional stability, and the aircraft responded smoothly to every control input. Smith kept the bomber centered in his gun sight as the distance continued to shrink. 500 yards, 450, 400. At 375 yards, the Helen's tail gunner opened fire. Tracers streaked past Smith's canopy, bright lines ripping through the darkness. The gunner had spotted the Black Widow. The element of surprise was gone. Smith now had only seconds before the bomber pilot initiated even more aggressive evasive maneuvers. Smith squeezed the trigger. A 3-second burst. 72 rounds. Longer than his previous attacks, but necessary. The Helen was maneuvering hard, and Smith needed to ensure a decisive hit. The 20mm shells tore through the bomber's fuselage. The right engine detonated in a violent explosion. The aircraft rolled inverted and entered an uncontrolled spin. Smith broke away to avoid flying debris as the burning bomber fell through the darkness. 9,000 feet, 8,000, 7,000, until it struck the water at 0:29. 29 minutes after midnight, 3 bombers destroyed, 9 still airborne. Smith checked his fuel gauge. 28% remaining. Critical. Most pilots return to base at 30% fuel. Below that threshold, even a minor delay could mean a forced landing or worse. Running out of fuel over open ocean at night was a death sentence. With no visual references and no way to judge altitude, a pilot would hit the water before realizing how low he was flying. Porter spoke again. One more contact remained on his scope. The 4th target. Heading 170. Altitude 4,000 feet. Range 9 miles. This was the bomber Smith had bypassed earlier, the low-altitude contact. It was now only 12 miles from Muro, close enough that Smith could see the American searchlights sweeping the sky ahead. Thin white beams sliced upward as anti-aircraft batteries stood ready. Gunners waited with fingers resting on triggers, scanning the darkness. Smith pushed the nose down and descended toward the 4th bomber. Diving conserved fuel. The P-61 dropped through 8,000 feet, then 765. Smith leveled off at 4,200 feet, slightly above the target. The altitude advantage gave him the perfect attack position. He could dive onto the bomber, use gravity to build speed, and reduce the time the enemy had to react. Range 4 miles. 3, 2. At 1 mile, Smith picked up the target visually. Another Betty. The bomber flew straight toward Muro without evasive action. The pilot either didn't know American night fighters were operating in the area or didn't care. Perhaps he believed his mission mattered more than his life. Japanese bomber crews often accepted death as the cost of completing their objectives. Smith slid into position below and behind the bomber at 350 yards. He glanced at his ammunition counter. 512 rounds remained, enough for 3 more attacks, maybe 4 if he was careful. But this was the 4th target. Every shot had to count. His fuel gauge read 23%, below all safety margins. If he engaged and missed, he wouldn't have enough fuel to pursue the bomber again. One chance, one burst. Then he would have a turn for home, whether the bomber was destroyed or not. At 0:34, Smith fired. A 2-second burst. 48 rounds. The 20mm shells converged on the Betty's central fuselage. The port wing tore free from the aircraft as fuel tanks ruptured. Fire raced across what remained of the wing structure. The bomber rolled left and plunged toward the ocean, impacting the water at 0:35. 35 minutes after midnight, for bombers destroyed in 55 minutes. Smith turned the P-61 back toward Muro. His fuel gauge now showed 21%. The calculation was simple. McGuire Field lay 18 miles to the south. At cruise speed, the Black Widow burned roughly 100 gallons per hour. Smith had about 60 gallons left, enough for 36 minutes of flight. Plenty to reach the airfield, assuming nothing went wrong. Porter scanned his radar scope. No contacts. The remaining 8 Japanese bombers had turned back. Whether they had detected Smith's attacks or simply lost their nerve didn't matter. The mission was complete. For enemy aircraft destroyed, 0 American casualties. The airfields were secure, and construction crews could work through the night without interruption. The Lingayen Gulf invasion timetable remained intact, but Smith's night was not over. At 0:42, Porter detected a new contact, heading north, range 4 miles, altitude 7,000 feet. Smith checked his position. He was 12 miles from McGuire Field, fuel 19%. The contact lay directly between Smith and his base. If it was a Japanese bomber, it was heading straight toward the airfields he had just offended. Engaging it would burn more fuel, possibly too much. Smith might not make it back. The alternative was worse. Allowing a Japanese aircraft to reach Muro unchallenged would stain the entire night's work. Smith had destroyed 4 bombers. If a 5th slipped through and killed American personnel, the numbers would mean nothing. Mission success meant protecting lives, not preserving his own at the expense of others. Smith turned toward the contact. Porter began calling vectors. The range closed rapidly. 3 miles. 2. 1. At 800 yards, Smith identified the aircraft visually. It wasn't a bomber. It was a Nakajima Ki 84-8. The Americans called it the Frank. A single-engine fighter with a maximum speed of 392 miles per hour, armed with 4 12.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons. One of the best Japanese fighters in service. The Frank outperformed the P-61 in almost every traditional measure. It was faster, more maneuverable, and had a superior rate of climb. In daylight, a skilled Frank pilot could outfight a Black Widow without much difficulty. But this was not daylight, and the Frank had no radar. The Japanese fighter pilot was flying blind, searching for American aircraft using visual cues that simply did not exist in complete darkness. Smith, however, still had one decisive advantage. The Frank pilot had no idea he was there. Smith slid the P-61 into position below and behind the fighter, range 500 yards. The setup mirrored his bomber intercepts exactly. Get close, fire, confirm the kill. But fighters were smaller, faster targets, harder to hit, and the Frank carried armor protection around its cockpit and engine. A 2-second burst might not be enough. Smith closed to 300 yards. His fuel gauge showed 17%. If he missed, there would be no second attempt. He would have to disengage immediately and hope he had enough fuel to reach McGuire Field. Missing also meant a Frank pilot would realize American night fighters were operating in the area. The element of surprise would be gone, making future interceptions far more dangerous. Smith centered the Frank in his gun sight. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. The calculation was stark. Engaging the fighter would drop his fuel to roughly 15%, below minimum safety margins. But letting it go meant risking American lives on the ground. The Black Widow's engines hummed steadily at 320 miles per hour. Ahead, the Frank flew straight and level, completely unaware it was being hunted. At 0:45, Smith made his decision. He squeezed the trigger. A 3-second burst, 72 rounds. The longest burst of the night. The shells ripped through the Frank's tail section and engine cowling. The fighter's engine erupted in flames, thick black smoke pouring from the cowling. The aircraft rolled sharply to the right and dove. Smith watched it fall, 7,000 feet, 6,000, 5,000. The fire grew brighter as it descended. At 3,000 feet, the pilot ejected. Smith saw the parachute bloom open, a white canopy against the black sky. The Frank continued its dive and slammed into the water at 0:46. Smith checked his fuel gauge, 15%. The engagement had consumed more fuel than he had calculated. McGuire Field lay 11 miles to the south. At cruise speed, the P-61's remaining fuel gave him approximately 22 minutes of flight time, just enough to reach the airfield with almost no reserve. Any headwind, any navigational error, and he would run dry before landing. Porter guided Smith toward Mindoro using radar navigation. The island appeared on the scope as a solid mass. McGuire Field sat on the southwestern coast. The airfield had been operational for only 4 days. It had minimal lighting and no instrument landing system. Pilots landing at night relied on a single row of kerosene lamps marking the runway. From 5 miles out, those lamps looked like faint yellow dots, easy to lose in darkness. Smith descended to 2,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed 13%. The P-61's fuel tanks held 646 gallons total. 13% meant 84 gallons remaining. At cruise power, that equated to about 18 minutes of flight time. Smith was 8 miles from the airfield. At 280 miles per hour, that meant roughly 1.7 minutes to reach the landing pattern. Enough fuel? Barely. At 0:52, Smith spotted the runway lights. 12 dim lamps arranged in a straight line. The runway was 5,000 feet long, made of crushed coral. Engineers had finished construction on December 26, the same day the 418th Night Fighter Squadron arrived. The strip was sufficient for P-61 operations, but it lacked the safety features of established airfields. There was no overrun area, no crash barriers. A landing too fast or too slow would send the aircraft off the runway. At night, with such minimal lighting, any mistake would likely be fatal. Smith entered the landing pattern at 1,000 feet. His fuel gauge read 11%, 57 gallons. The P-61 burned fuel more rapidly during landing approach. Power settings fluctuated constantly. Engines spooled up during turns, then throttled back during descents. Each change consumed additional fuel. Smith calculated he had about 12 minutes of fuel remaining, more than enough to land, unless something went wrong. At 0:55, something did. The runway lights went out. All 12 lamps extinguished at once. Total darkness. Smith was 3 miles from the runway. Altitude 800 feet. Airspeed 140 knots. Without runway lights, he had no visual reference. The P-61 would strike the ground before he realized how low he was flying. Porter suggested using the radar altimeter. The instrument measured height above ground by bouncing radio waves off the surface, accurate to within 50 feet. Smith could descend slowly using the altimeter and dead reckoning navigation. When the altimeter read 0, he would be on the ground. The technique was extremely dangerous. Any navigational error would put the aircraft down off the runway, into trees, coral, or construction equipment. Smith checked his fuel gauge, 9%, 46 gallons, 8 minutes of flight time. There was no possibility of diverting. Tacloban on Leyte was the nearest alternative, 90 miles northeast. The P-61 would run out of fuel 40 miles short. Smith had one choice: land at McGuire Field without runway lights, or crash into the ocean and hope for rescue before drowning. The decision was simple. Smith had survived 4 bomber intercepts and 1 fighter engagement. 5 kills in 55 minutes, the highest single-night total ever achieved by an American night fighter pilot in the Pacific Theater. He had saved lives on the ground, protected the airfields, and ensured the Lingayen Gulf invasion could proceed on schedule. Dying now because of extinguished runway lights would make the entire mission meaningless. Smith turned the P-61 toward where he believed the runway lay. Altitude 600 feet, fuel 9%. Below him, the darkness was absolute. He descended to 400 feet. The radar altimeter read 380 feet above ground level. Smith reduced airspeed to 120 knots. The P-61's stall speed was 95 knots with flaps fully extended. 120 knots gave him a 25-knot safety margin. Not much, but slowing further would burn precious fuel. The mathematics were merciless. Porter monitored the radar scope. The coastline of Mindoro appeared clearly. McGuire Field was inland approximately 1 mile from the beach. Smith relied on his compass to navigate. The runway was aligned north to south. He approached from the north on a heading of 180 degrees. If his navigation was correct, the runway would be directly ahead. If it wasn't, he would come down in jungle, unfinished construction zones, or jagged coral. At 0:58, Smith lowered the landing gear. 3 green indicator lights confirmed that all 3 wheels were down and locked. Main gear beneath each engine nacelle and the nose wheel forward. The P-61's landing gear was rugged, built to handle rough, primitive airfields. But without visual references, Smith had no way to judge his touchdown point. He could hit too hard, collapse the gear, and the aircraft would cartwheel. At 120 knots, neither man would survive. The fuel gauge showed 7%, 36 gallons, 5 minutes remaining. Smith extended full flaps. Airspeed bled down to 110 knots. The Black Widow descended at 300 feet per minute. The radar altimeter ticked downward, 250 feet, 200, 150. Smith still couldn't see the ground. No lights, no shadows, nothing but instruments and the hope that his navigation was true. At 100 feet, Smith reduced power. The descent rate increased to 400 feet per minute, steeper than normal, but necessary. Fuel was almost gone. 75 feet, 50, 25. Smith braced for impact. His hands tightened around the control column. His feet hovered on the rudder pedals, ready to correct any sudden deviation. At 0:59, the P-61's main wheels slammed into the crushed coral runway. The impact was hard. The jolt rippled through the airframe, but the landing gear held. 3 seconds later, the nose will touch down. Smith applied the brakes. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. 100 knots, 80, 60, 40. At 20 knots, the Black Widow slowed to taxi speed. Smith still couldn't see where he was on the runway. He kept braking until the aircraft rolled to a complete stop. Fuel remaining, 6%, 29 gallons, 3 minutes of fuel left. Ground crew members arrived, sweeping flashlights across the aircraft. They guided Smith to the parking area. The P-61's engine shut down at 1:03, 1 hour and 3 minutes after takeoff. Smith climbed out of the cockpit. His legs felt stiff. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. 5 intercepts, 5 kills, 1 blind landing, all within 63 minutes. Porter climbed out of the radar operator's compartment moments later. He had tracked 5 targets, vectored Smith to each intercept, and maintained radar contact throughout every engagement. Without Porter's skill, none of the kills would have been possible. Night fighting was a team effort, pilot and radar operator working in perfect coordination. Ground crews inspected the P-61. There was no damage. All 4 cannons had functioned flawlessly. Total ammunition expended, 408 rounds. Smith had launched with 800. He landed with 392 rounds remaining, enough for 2 more intercepts, but no fuel to pursue them. Intelligence officers arrived at 1:15. They wanted precise details: times, locations, altitudes, aircraft types. Smith provided everything from memory. For Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, 1 Nakajima Ki, 49 Helen bomber, 1 Nakajima Ki, 84 Frankfurter, all destroyed between 23:57 on December 29th and 0:46 on December 30th. Total engagement time, 49 minutes. The kills were confirmed through multiple sources. Ground radar logs matched Smith's intercepts. Coast watchers reported aircraft crashing into the sea. At first light, wreckage was visible exactly where Smith said it would be. 4 bombers and 1 fighter. 4 kills in one night equaled the record for American night fighter pilots. But Smith wasn't finished. On December 30th, 1944 at 14:30 hours, Smith flew again. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft had been reported over Muro. Single-engine fighters, faster than bombers, harder to intercept. Smith and Porter took off once more in the same P-61. The aircraft had been refueled and rearmed. 800 rounds of 20mm ammunition, 646 gallons of fuel. At 15:12, Porter detected a contact heading north. Altitude 12,000 feet. Range 8 miles. Smith climbed to intercept. The target was another Nakajima Ki, 84 Frankfurter, faster than the P-61 in level flight, but Smith held the altitude advantage. He rolled the Black Widow over and dove from above. The diving attack pushed the speed to nearly 390 miles per hour, faster than the Frank's maximum level speed. Smith fired at 400 yards, a 2-second burst, 48 rounds. The Frank's engine detonated. The fighter rolled inverted and plunged into the ocean. Smith's 7th kill. That final victory made him the highest-scoring American night fighter ace of World War II. 7 confirmed kills, all achieved in less than 24 hours of combat flying. No other American night fighter pilot in any theater would ever match that total. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron continued operating from Muro through January 1945. The unit scored 18 total kills during the war, the highest total of any P-61 squadron in the Pacific. Smith's 7 kills accounted for 39% of the squadron's entire record. Porter received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his role as radar operator. His skill had made every intercept possible. The P-61 times A Waston continued flying combat missions through May 1945. The aircraft survived the war undamaged after VJ Day, but like most Black Widows, it was eventually scrapped. Only 4 P-61s exist today. None of them is Smith's aircraft. The nose art, the kill markings, the machine that hunted 4 bombers in 80 minutes, lost to history. Moorefield Field supported the Lingayen Gulf invasion exactly as planned. American forces landed on January 9, 1945. P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts operating from Muro provided air cover. The airfield Smith defended on December 29th made that air cover possible. Engineers later estimated that Japanese bombs striking construction areas would have delayed completion of the airfields by 2 weeks. 2 weeks meant the invasion would have been delayed. Casualties would have mounted. The war would have dragged on longer. Smith survived the war. He returned to the United States in February 1946, left the military, and became a civilian. He never sought publicity. He never wrote memoirs. He never told his story. The only records of what he accomplished exist in military archives, unit histories, intelligence summaries, and the dry, impersonal paperwork of confirmed kills and completed missions. The P-61 Black Widow proved what night fighters were capable of. More than 700 aircraft were built and flown in every major theater of the war: Europe, the Pacific, China, Burma, India, and the Mediterranean. From 1944 through 1945, the Black Widow dominated night combat. After the war, the P-61 was redesignated the F-61 and remained in service until 1954, when it was finally retired and replaced by jet-powered night fighters with higher speed and better performance. But in December 1944, over Muro, the Black Widow was the most advanced night fighter in the world, and Carroll Smith was the best pilot flying it. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do us a favor and hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who saved lives with radar. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States? The United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Our community spans the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're a part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Major Carroll Smith doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.